So, okay, we're going to talk about not Nirvana, the incredible rock band, but this unattainable dream that we have for integrated project delivery. And today, I'm going to talk about 3 steps for information management Nirvana. Let's start with some numbers. So 8.4% loss of productivity due to just revisions and signing documents and merging comments, etc. 21% loss of hours managing documents. 37% of teams start projects with unclear or no scope. 90% of data is not used, and is unstructured, and 96% is unused. Yeah, this is like big numbers. It's sad, but why? Why does this happen? Well, project teams generally fail to identify the true customer and the purpose of information. If we could do those 2 things early on, we'd be in a lot better position. We create too generalized scopes. We sometimes are not detailed enough early enough. We create lots of text. There's BIM execution plans in Word and PDF and sent on emails that nobody ever reads. Everything's created in a vacuum by one person rather than a team-based collaborative approach. Not included in the contract sometimes. And the traditional process that we have is that we might download a document, make some changes, share it as a PDF on an email, as I said, and then publish it. And the history of that gets lost. It's very difficult to enforce. It's not machine readable necessarily. And a lot of the time we create more and more spreadsheets which become bigger and bigger. Every time we need to add more information, we add another column. There's more cells. There's more to manage. And it becomes unmanageable. So the problems that we face, it's not a lean workflow. We are generally using integrated tools. We're using a lot of different formats, a lot of copy and paste, end up with having everyone their own to-do lists. And we're also against the clock. So time is ticking, pressure on deadlines, the project is running, always a problem. And the implication of this is everything takes too long, there's risk in it, additional cost, not being proactive, and lots of finger pointing, lots of misunderstanding and blame. So, to summarize the problem that I'm hoping to share, these 3 steps that will solve, we create large documents, they're isolated, they're created by one person, there's a real challenge to get people's feedback early and often, and we have approval bottlenecks. We wait until everything is done before we then go and ask for approval, rather than in piecemeal and a much more lean approach to it. So, today I'm going to go through very quickly 3 steps to integrated project delivery with the essential pieces that will help us get to information management Nirvana. The first one is planning. There's lots of different uses for a model, and if we don't know what they are early on, we can't plan for them, so we should think about those uses, define them very clearly, and then start to, in a central hub, including your customer, and collaborating together, understand people's roles and contact details, and collaborate to not create documents, but create agreements. Principle number 1. We should also try and have continuous agreements. So rather than it being waiting until that BIM execution plan is finished and releasing it, if we could release it on a piecemeal basis, and the client could have only access to the pieces of information that really are needed at that point in time, it would expedite that approval process. If we could also use engaging content rather than boring long documents, how about including embedded information and processes that are actual workflow diagrams, icons, videos, things that are actually going to engage people? This is really how we can start to get agreement rather than create a document that nobody reads. The second one, so the first one is planning. The second one is scoping, defining a clear scope, being able to understand what is required, but having a purpose for that is essential. Understanding why we're going to deliver at a certain point in time is the first step. And then understanding what is required from a list. These are the elements potentially, what scope is needed. But we also need to remember that including non-model-based content in that workflow is essential. And as we do that, we're building a grid that can be a set of requirements that are understood what is required at each milestone by exactly who is responsible for it, and understand when the handover occurs between one team and another team so that we can see where the gaps and the potential pitfalls might be. and every single one of these being defined in real clear detail about how much is required, the checklist items that are needed, maybe videos embedded to describe how to carry out the task, whether it's appointing an information manager or modeling a certain aspect with a certain amount of parameter property detail. So this grid, this framework, enables us to capture all of those really fun things that the ISO 19650 or level of information need principles ask us to do. So this is a scoping framework, but also clearly defining the rules and so instead of just defining what is required and not being able to validate it, what we're really wanting is an ability to define what the requirements are that are going to be checked. How is this going to be evaluated? So understanding that if a certain property is required by a certain team at a certain stage, should it be a certain value or greater than and less than? Should it be a warranty and a date and in this format to the ISO standards? Okay, so that's all good. You could have a plan and a scope, but you need much more than that. If you just have a plan and scope, you end up still with this situation where people are throwing information over the fence and letting somebody else deal with it. It really happens too often in our projects, even if you've got this in some kind of a plan and scope. So we need to make it legally binding. We need it to enforce it in some way. So it becomes a contract. So that's the next step. You've got the plan and scope. It needs to become enforceable by law. But not everything for everyone. We see so many people that are handing over huge sets of documentation to everyone on the project, whereas they only need a very small filtered set. So being able to filter that down, having the detail but filter it down into filtered appointment documents is really, really important in that contract. But just putting it in the contract, is that going to make it happen? No, because this is the when and how that contracts get used. It's when this guy hits the fan and the other guy is using a contract to beat somebody over the head with it. But that's happening only when it's too late, only when there's a really serious problem on the project. So what do we need? We need a carrot. We need some kind of incentive. So that's the last part, which is verification, continuous verification that people are actually achieving what they said they were going to in that contract. And the verify side of things is continuous delivery, lean concepts, understanding the tasks down to here are columns, they were assigned to, it looks like me, on the structural team. And when I've done with them or I want the appointing party to review them, I can drag and drop them and it will automatically notify them that they're ready. We can also use the really structured machine-readable rules to validate whether it's using an output to Excel or the IDS XML that we're working with Building Smart to be able to develop and export to other teams in other software to be able to use and validate in that workflow. So lots of other ways of model checking, but the principle is to QA the model, QA the deliverables prior to the person that was receiving them and being able to give them machine-readable scope, machine-readable requirements. It makes it a lot easier for them to do that. The last part is verification of the content that is accepted so that payment can happen. And if we can tie all of that planning and contracting and verification through to payment, then that's the true carrot that we can achieve. Because if we have one bad piece of information, we know what happens to the fruit bowl when it looks like this. Unfortunately, very rapidly the rest of the fruit are infected. So three essential steps to information management Nirvana are to plan and incorporate actually useful information, but in a more engaging way, rather than just Word documents. Let's use web-based tools that really visualize and communicate. Let's use clear scoping with machine-readable rules that can then be verified, and let's hopefully connect that through to the payment process at the end of the day. If you're doing this, you're almost there to following ISO 19650 principles. So without even thinking and talking that all of the ISO 19650 jargon and three-letter acronyms, just following standard principles of planning something, scoping it, and verifying it, that is a workflow. There's a couple of resources there if you are into the ISO principles, and also some training that will be released to help you. If that's of interest to you, it's a free training session. And my final tip is don't plan late, plan early. Thank you.